Well, let's bring in my first guest now, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker. Gerard, thanks for joining me on the U.S. Report. Absolutely historic day here to have you on the program. I mean, it's always notable when you join us, but it is a historic day because we've got a new pope, and I wanted to get your reaction because he is, after all, an American. Now, it's early days. We don't have a huge body of work like we did with, say, Ratzinger to pour through. But what is your reaction to this, the first American pope?
Yeah, well, actually, look, extraordinary scenes, obviously, in Vatican City. Extraordinary scenes over here. I've seen many images of Americans, particularly Catholics, obviously, Catholic schools celebrating my Catholic school where my daughter teaches. Erupted. The children erupted as they heard the news and then saw the American Pope for the first time. It is a remarkable thing. Look, I think my main reaction, James, is that I think I don't for a second believe the cardinals picked Pope Leo XIV because he was American. Of course he was. Of course, there are lots of reasons why they picked him. But I do think it's interesting timing. I mean, we have a situation where we have a president of the United States who is upending the world in all kinds of ways. Some ways, a lot of people don't like. Some ways, maybe they do like. And I think actually the kind of having an American Pope at the same time is going to, with obviously I think we can assume, and from some of the things we've seen that he said, a very different view of the world. I think there's almost a kind of a balancing here. America's role in the world remains the dominant power. It remains the political, cultural superpower influencing the world, influencing it under Donald Trump in very different ways from it has done in the past. And I think you're going to see a little bit of they're going to see an interaction, not a direct interaction, but a bit of an interaction between these two world leaders now, where Pope Leo, I think, who is plainly, following in Pope Francis's footsteps in terms of social justice, very strongly for the poor, very strongly for migrants, very strongly for the global South and helping there. It's going to be, I think you're going to have quite an interesting interaction, quite an interesting balance between these two Americans now who are such dominant figures in the world.
And it's interesting because Donald Trump tweeted very graciously and very positively about the new pontiff and the selection of an American pontiff. But it is interesting because I was just reflecting that popes often reflect the times. Francis was a pope to deal with globalization. John Paul II was a pope who dealt with the Cold War and communism. So it does suggest that, for all the talk of American decline, that actually this selection is actually evidence of an America that is just as dominant, but maybe, as you suggest, in different fashions than it may have been in the past.
I think that's exactly right. I think you're going to see a different look. He's the Pope, first of all, so he's the universal pastor, the pontiff, the head of the universal church. That's his that's his standing, that's his role, that's what he will do. It will be a pope for everybody. But I think there will be a lot of interest in the fact that, like all of us, he's shaped by his background. He grew up in Chicago. Now we know he has spent a lot of time overseas as a missionary and in other positions, but he will have an American disposition. He will have an American viewpoint fed through the particular, the teachings of the church, obviously, and the particular approach to his faith that he has. And so, yeah, I think it is interesting, James, that we're going to see this very significant American figure influencing the spiritual side of the world, the spiritual aspect of humanity, in the way that we have this other extraordinary American figure influencing the material, the God and mammon, if you like, the contrast. It's like America's world, and we're all living in it.
And indeed, I mean, it would be funny to see how a Chicagoan deals with Roman-style pizza. But also, there's plenty of other news here I want to discuss with you as well, Gerard, because you are, of course, as Sting once sang, an Englishman in New York, which makes me want to ask you about this other piece of news here, that Donald Trump and Keir Starmer have announced a trade deal between the UK and the US. Among other things, British steel and aluminium will not be tariffed, and farmers are going to get new access to American markets. Here's a little bit of Donald Trump before.
Once again, I want to thank Prime Minister Starmer. He's been terrific for his partnership in this matter, the special relationship and external bond. It's really an external and an internal bond between our two countries will soon be stronger than ever before. And we really do. We have a great relationship. I want to just say that the representatives of UK have been so professional. And it's been an honor doing business with all of them, and in particular the Prime Minister.
Were you surprised, Gerard, by the warmth of the praise that Donald Trump heaped on Keir Starmer and the whole British Labour government and their team? What was your reaction to that?
I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, for a number of reasons. Firstly, Donald Trump is an Anglophile. We know that. He even talked about that in his remarks, gushing about the British ambassador to Washington's accent, talking about how much he loved his coastal golf resorts around the British Isles. So he's a big Anglophile. He obviously has British blood, Scottish blood. We know that. We know that he really kind of bonded with Keir Starmer when they met a couple of months ago, when, of course, Keir Starmer brandished an invitation from the King to a rare, if not unprecedented, second state dinner for Donald Trump. He loves all that. But much more importantly, I think, is that this is an important look. There's not much detail in this. You mentioned steel and you mentioned some of the other things which are there, certainly, but there's not a lot of detail and there's not a lot of scale to this. The numbers that are being talked about are relatively small. But this was really important for both sides. Donald Trump has been desperate to show for the last month, since his Liberation Day tariffs kind of got greeted with a massive global raspberry by financial markets and everybody else. He's been desperate to show that he has is an ability to make deals with countries that will reduce these tariffs and that will benefit the United States. And he can say that about this deal. You know, it's the first deal that's been struck. It's symbolically important in that respect. And it's very important for Keir Starmer and the British government because you have to show something for Brexit. Starmer, of course, didn't support Brexit. Most of the Labour Party didn't, but they're stuck with it. They're there. They're now the government. They need to show that the British economy is in pretty dire straits. So they want to show that they've got something. They also want to show how influential they can be with Donald Trump at a time when the world is maybe resiling from Donald Trump and sort of standing a little bit in fear and loathing of him. So it's a good deal for both sides, at least in terms of the headlines, at least in terms of the appearance, that warm conversation over the speakerphone in the Oval Office. That's all good. There's a lot of questions about what it actually amounts to in economic terms, but politically, diplomatically, symbolically, it's valuable for both of them.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because, you talk about that symbolism, and you've also written in the Wall Street Journal about how with these tariffs, and this was before this deal, that Armageddon, as you called it, had been deferred. Given that, and given, this, do you see a new trade order coming out of this? Or do you think that, as you've also suggested, that possibly really just Trump is bumbling from one thing to another, and we just sort of have to take the good things where they come, such as this deal?
I think both things can be true. I don't think there's any question that Trump is look, Trump believes in tariffs. He believes passionately in tariffs. He thinks they're an intrinsic good and he wants them. He does apparently want to negotiate them away or at least down. But I think some form of tariff will remain. And I think part of the bumbling we've seen is that he likes the tariffs, but he realizes he's been persuaded by his key economic advisors what a kind of a mess he's creating with that announcement of all the tariffs back then. So there's the bumbling. I do think, James, and thank you for mentioning the column this week. I do think that for all his bumbling and for all the damage that what he's been talking, that his talk has done to the global economy so far, to the global financial markets, I think Trump is kind of groping towards the new world order that we know we are living in, which is a world which is not as globalized as it used to be. So I think what we're seeing, to give Trump some credit, is actually him understanding where the world is moving and trying in the best way he can to exploit opportunities for America, just as the rest of the world will need to exploit opportunities from this new, less global, less integrated, less connected world that we are clearly entering.
Gerard, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And everybody go read his stuff in the Wall Street Journal. It is fantastic.